The eviction notice arrived on a Wednesday. Nora found it stuck to the bottom of her left foot when she padded barefoot to the kitchen at 6 in the morning to start coffee. She had slept through everything. The building's super sliding it under the door, Lily's alarm going off at 6:30, the shower running for 12 minutes. The building's full orchestra of waking up sounds that she had learned to sleep through 4 years ago when Marcus left, and sleep became something she negotiated with rather than took for granted. By the end of this story, I'm also going to share something special with those of you who stick around to the end, something that can help you in your personal life. But first, let's get back to. She peeled the notice off her heel and read it standing at the counter with the coffee maker grinding through its cycle and filling the apartment with the smell that belonged to better mornings. 60 days. She read it twice. The second time did not help. The arithmetic was not complicated. 2 months. Rent $1,200. She was behind 2 months already, which meant she owed $2,400 before she could begin addressing what came next, and her checking account held $1,847, a number that was only that high because she had taken her grandmother's pearl earrings to a consignment shop on 40th Street the week before. The earrings had been the last piece of jewelry her mother had given her, passed down from Marion's mother before that, small irregular pearls in a setting that had gone out of fashion decades ago. The shop had given her $180 for them, and she had stood outside on the pavement for a minute afterward, in the particular stillness of someone who has just done something they cannot undo. She set the eviction notice on the counter next to the coffee maker and listened to Lily singing something shapeless and tuneless from her bedroom down the hall. An 8-year-old's private music, syllables chosen for sound rather than meaning, the kind of noise children made when they were genuinely content and did not yet know to be afraid of mornings. She did not tell Lily about the notice over breakfast. She scrambled eggs and made toast and agreed that yes, the cartoon playing on Lily's tablet had a very funny dog, and she smiled at the right moments, and she was already calculating. For months ago, she had lost her primary client. Not through any failure of her own, technically. Harmon Creative had been a small agency, 8 full-time employees, founded by a man named Jeffrey Harmon who made good decisions about design and catastrophic ones about his personal life. His divorce had unraveled the company the way divorces unraveled everything Jeffrey touched, loudly, expensively, with depositions and asset disputes, and departing employees who took client relationships with them before anything official was announced. Nora had been freelancing through Harmon for 2 years, bringing in steady design work for brands too small to support in-house staff, $3,800 on a good month. When the company dissolved in a single August week, those clients were claimed by other agencies before she could contact them. She had the print shop now, 3 days a week at $14.50 an hour. She picked up freelance through 2 platforms and took whatever came through. Last month, she had brought in $2,100 total. The month before that, $1,950. The month before that, $2,340, and she had thought that meant things were turning around, and then they had not. The apartment lease was in her name only. It had been since Marcus left, 4 years ago, when Lily was not quite 4 and still pronounced her LS as WS and still believed, in the way that small children believe things not yet disproved, that her father was somewhere nearby and coming back. He had gone to Austin for a job opportunity and then had continued not coming back, the calls and texts tapering in a way that had no identifiable ending point, the way certain things simply faded out rather than finished. He sent money sometimes. Deposits of $200 or $300 that arrived without warning or explanation, nothing she could budget around, nothing she could build a plan from. She had never taken him to court for support because the process required money she did not have and time she could not spare, and because some part of her had understood that forcing the issue would cost more, in ways hard to quantify, than the irregular deposits ever provided. Lily did not ask about him much anymore. That was its own kind of sadness, distinct from the other kinds. She dropped Lily at school and went to the print shop and ran orders, and spent her lunch break in the break room with leftover pasta and her phone, searching apartment listings within a radius that would keep Lily at her current school. Everything with 2 bedrooms started at $1,500. First, last, and deposit meant she needed a minimum of $4,500 to get a key, and she had $1,847, and that number was moving in one direction only. The medical debt was $12,400. Lily's ear surgery from March. She was paying it down at $180 a month and had been for 8 months, and with interest factored in, the balance had dropped by $720 in that time. She did not think about this number very often because thinking about it did not change it. She put her phone away and went back to running orders. The call came at 4:15 while she was shutting down her workstation. The man's voice was measured and unhurried. The voice of someone who delivered consequential news regularly enough that it had become its own professional discipline. He introduced himself as Raymond Sills, an estate attorney based in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He was calling regarding the estate of Edward James Calloway. Nora stopped moving. She did not know that name. Then, after a second, she did. Her mother's father. The grandfather she had never met. She took the call outside in the parking lot without stopping for her jacket, standing between 2 cars in the November cold while Raymond Sills gave her the information in the careful sequence of someone accustomed to people needing time to process what they were hearing. Edward James Calloway had died 6 weeks ago at the age of 91, in a care facility where he had lived for the last 12 years following a stroke that had left him without much speech. He had been of sound mind through most of that period, Sills was careful to note. He had updated his will 3 times during his time in the facility. The most recent version, executed 14 months before his death, named Nora and Webb as sole beneficiary of his estate. The estate held no liquid assets. Edward had liquidated everything financial in the years before his stroke, for reasons the records did not fully clarify. What remained was a property, Calloway Manor, in Hale's Crossing, Pennsylvania. 22 acres of mixed woodland and grounds. The manor house itself had been built in 1911. There was a condition attached to the bequest. To formally claim the estate, Nora would need to take up legal residency at the property and maintain that residency for 90 consecutive days. Not a visit. Actual residency. After 90 days of continuous habitation, title transferred fully and unconditionally. If she declined or failed to meet the residency requirement, the estate would pass to the Calloway Foundation, an independent charitable trust Edward had established in 1998. There was one other relevant matter. Gerald Allen Calloway, Edward's son from a second marriage, had already contacted the firm. Gerald was 59 years old and had worked, on and off, in property development. He had not been named in the will. He intended to contest it. Nora stood in the parking lot until her fingers went numb and then went back inside to get her jacket. She called Sills back at 8 that night, after Lily was in bed, and asked the questions she had spent 4 hours formulating. Was the will likely to survive a contest? Sills believed so. It had been executed properly, witnessed by 2 parties independent of the family. Edward had been assessed for competency by a physician 30 days before signing. What was the property worth? Based on the most recent county assessment, $240,000, accounting for the manor and the land. Comparable sales in the area were difficult to find because comparable properties rarely came to market. What happened to Gerald's interests if the will held? Nothing. Edward had updated his estate plan specifically to remove Gerald from any share of the property. The will included a notation that Sills was not authorized to disclose in detail, but that had been important to Edward. She thanked him and said she would be in touch. Then she sat at the kitchen table with the eviction notice on one side of her and a legal pad on the other, and worked through everything she knew. Her mother had said one thing about Edward Calloway, once, when Nora was 12 and working on a school family history project and needed to fill in the blanks on her mother's side of a family tree. They had been eating dinner, spaghetti with Jared sauce, and Nora had asked, and Marian had set down her fork with the brief deliberateness of someone choosing words carefully, and said, "My father was a cold man who valued things more than people." Then she had asked Nora to pass the bread. That was the entirety of what Nora had. Her mother had left Pennsylvania at 19 and never gone back. She had made a life in Queens that did not reference what she had left. She had died at 53 when Nora was 25, cancer moving faster than the treatments that were supposed to slow it. Nora had been 3 months from marrying Marcus, and the wedding had happened smaller and quieter than planned, and she had stood in the place where her mother should have stood and felt the specific absence that did not diminish. Marian had never talked about Edward. She had never said he was cruel or that she hated him. She had said he valued things more than people, and she had said it without heat, and she had changed the subject, and Nora had learned to read that subject as a locked room, one of several Marion kept. A man who valued things more than people, at the end of 91 years, had reached across 4 decades of silence and left everything to the granddaughter he had never once tried to contact while he was healthy enough to do so. Nora looked at the eviction notice for a long time. She packed on a Saturday. Furniture that would not fit in the car went into a storage unit that would cost $89 a month. The car received 3 suitcases, 2 boxes of kitchen essentials and books, and Lily's backpack, which weighed approximately as much as Lily and contained 6 stuffed animals, a watercolor set, a plastic container of colored pencils that rattled with each step, and a library book about horses that she had renewed twice and would need to return before they left Queens. Dana, her co-worker at the print shop, listened to the explanation with the focused attention of someone deciding whether to be supportive or alarmed. An inherited manor, Dana said. Yes. In Pennsylvania. Rural Pennsylvania. That you've never seen. Correct. Dana looked at her for a moment. How long have you been behind on rent? 2 months. And how much do you have saved? Nora told her. Dana made a sound that was not unkind. Okay, so you don't really have a choice. Not much of one. Then go. She handed Nora a coffee sleeve with her cell number written on it in marker. Text me when you get there so I know you haven't driven into a ditch. Her friend Bethany called twice before they left, both times with a new concern Nora had already thought through. The house would need extensive work. What did Nora know about managing a large property? Gerald Calloway had money and lawyers and clearly expected to win. 3 months in rural Pennsylvania, away from her freelance contacts, could set her back professionally in ways that would take another 6 months to recover. What if she spent 90 days there and then lost the contest anyway? The second call went to voicemail. Nora heard everything Bethany was saying. None of it was wrong. She had run the same calculation herself, more than once, in the quiet after Lily was asleep. What the calculation missed was that the alternative, 2 months in Queens scrambling for a deposit she could not raise while her income ran $800 short of her expenses each month, also had a set of costs, and those costs were not uncertain at all. They were arithmetic. She was not choosing between a good option and a bad one. She was choosing between 2 different kinds of hard, and one of them at least had some version of solid ground at the end of it. They left at 6 on a Tuesday morning in November. Lily slept through New York and most of New Jersey and woke up in Pennsylvania asking about breakfast. They stopped at a diner outside Allentown and ate eggs and toast, and Lily colored on the paper placemat with the crayons the restaurant provided, and Nora drank too much coffee and looked at the map on her phone and thought about 90 days. Hale's Crossing appeared around 2 in the afternoon. A valley town, compressed into the shape of the land that held it. A grain elevator still operational by the look of it. A water tower painted blue with the town name in white letters. Main Street ran 4 blocks before it ran out of reasons to continue. Hardware store, pharmacy that also appeared to sell farm supplies based on its window display. A post office that looked like it shared its building with the DMV. Patsy's Diner at the main corner with a neon open sign in red in the window. They stopped at Patsy's because Lily needed a bathroom and Nora needed coffee and whatever information could be gathered from someone who had lived here their whole life. The diner held 6 tables and a counter with 8 stools. It smelled of coffee and something with onions being cooked in the back. A woman in her mid-50s worked behind the counter with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned every step of this work through repetition across decades. Gray-streaked hair, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, hands that moved to the coffee pot and the children's menu and the box of crayons without apparent thought, as if anticipating what every table would need before anyone spoke. She set coffee in front of Nora and the crayons and menu in front of Lily and said, "What brings you through Hale's Crossing?" Nora said she had inherited property nearby. Calloway Manor. The woman's hands paused for just a moment. Not hesitation. More like recalibration. You related to Edward? He was my grandfather. I never met him. The woman's name was Patsy Burke. She said Calloway Manor was a solid building, good stone, built before people stopped building things to outlast themselves. She said Edward Calloway had been a private man, and in her delivery, the word private carried several layers of meaning packed tightly together. He had hired workers from Harrisburg and Allentown for any work done at the property, never from Hale's Crossing. He had come into town for supplies, been polite, said nothing that anyone remembered. Stories had accumulated over the years, as stories accumulated around closed things in small towns, but Patsy said the word stories in a tone that acknowledged she did not entirely credit them. What kind of stories? Lily asked, because Lily asked questions regardless of whether they were directed at her. Patsy smiled at her. Nothing scary, sweetheart. Just people imagining things because they couldn't see inside. She refilled Nora's coffee and gave them directions. The lane to the manor left the main road heading north and climbed steadily for 3 miles before a stone pillar marked the turn. The lane was unpaved gravel, maintained but not recently, and it wound through old hardwoods stripped bare by November, their branches making patterns against the gray sky that Nora kept looking at through the windshield as the car moved slowly forward. The house came into view on the second curve. She stopped the car. Gray field stone, fitted without mortar in the old method, the individual stones chosen for how they locked against each other. 2 full stories with a dormer row above cutting into a slate roof whose lines were unbroken. 2 chimneys, both standing. 6 windows across the front on each floor, all still glazed, not one of them boarded or broken. The ivy on the east wall had been growing unchecked for more than a decade and had reached the upper windows, pressing against the glass in a way that would need addressing before long. But the masonry beneath it was untouched and straight. The grounds were consumed. Ornamental plantings had gone wild far past their intended shapes, the formal bones of what had once been a designed garden still visible beneath the disorder, a geometry of paths and hedges and planted beds that suggested something that had been intentional and careful before time reclaimed it. But the stone. Nora had grown up in New York City watching buildings go up and come down, had learned to read structures the way her mother had taught her to read prices in a grocery store. Past the surface, past what things were presented as, to the underlying question of whether they would hold. The manor's walls were plumb. The roofline was straight. The chimneys were intact. What was wrong with this building was fixable. It would cost money, and she did not have money, and that was a problem she would solve when she knew its exact shape. She drove the rest of the lane to the front porch and sat in the car for a moment before getting out. "It's enormous," Lily said. "It is. Why did he need so much house?" Nora did not know. Some people build things big because they have plans that need space. The front porch was fieldstone matching the house, for substantial columns supporting a porch roof. The boards across the porch floor were wood and had not managed 12 winters without maintenance, soft and punky in places, needing care before they became a hazard. But the structure beneath the boards was stone, and the porch was not going to collapse. The boards could be replaced when money allowed. The lockbox was where Sills had described it. A single key, heavy brass, old-fashioned bow cut. The front door resisted at first, the oak swollen in its stone frame, then yielded with real effort, scraping inward with a sound that carried through the empty entrance hall beyond. Cold air moved out. The house had been sealed for most of 12 years, opened only for whatever maintenance inspections the trust required, and the smell that came with the cold was layered and complex. Old wood and time and dust, and underneath those things something else, faint and specific, something that was not decay or dampness but carried a slight metallic quality, like a workshop smell from another room. Nora stepped inside. The entrance hall was wide, 20 feet across, possibly more. The ceiling was 12 feet up, plaster molding still mostly intact around the perimeter. The hardwood floor was dark with age, dulled by years without care, but the boards lay flat and undisturbed, no warping from water, no buckling from movement in the subfloor. The staircase ran up the right wall on iron balusters in a repeating pattern, the handrail a dark wood shaped by someone who had cared about the curve at its base. Drop cloths covered the furniture throughout. A console table against the left wall, 2 chairs, something taller near the foot of the stairs, all under canvas sheeting that had gone from white to gray. The shapes beneath were patient and still, as if they had been waiting a long time and had made their peace with it. And at the far end of the entrance hall, filling the entire wall from baseboard to ceiling, a mirror. Nora's eyes went to it the way eyes went to fire or water, drawn without being asked. The frame was carved dark wood, a species she could not immediately name, something dense and very dark, not quite walnut, but in that family. The carving covered every surface of the frame without break, deep and precise. a pattern of interlocked geometric forms threaded through with what might have been organic shapes, vines perhaps, or roots, or the abstracted representation of something she lacked the vocabulary to name. The carving had a quality she had seen in things made by people who understood their material entirely, not decoration added onto an object, but form and object being the same thing, inseparable. The glass was aged. The silver backing had developed the mottling that old mirrors accumulated over decades, irregular variations in tone that gave her reflection a particular quality, slightly diffuse, slightly warm. The sharpness of the image softened by the imperfections in the backing so that she looked at herself through something that mediated between her and her own face. She realized she had walked the full length of the entrance hall without noticing she was moving. Lily stood next to her. They both looked at the mirror, and the mirror looked back at them, and the fire Nora would light in the sitting room an hour later was not yet burning. So the reflection held only the gray November light filtering through the transom window above the front door. Lily put her hand flat against the glass. "It's cold," she said. "Old glass always is." Lily tapped it once with her knuckles, lightly, with the casual scientific curiosity she applied to the world. A test rather than an examination. Then she stepped back, and they went to find the kitchen. The kitchen occupied the rear left of the ground floor, a large room floored with stone polished smooth by decades of use. The walls were plaster over stone, and Nora ran her hand along one stretch between the window and the door frame and felt the substantial resistance of more material than was necessary. 6 inches where 4 would have been structurally sufficient. 8, maybe. A wall built thicker than its purpose required. She noted this without understanding why and moved on. The appliances were from the late 1970s, large and deliberately built. Everything worked. The range caught on the second try. The refrigerator hummed when she found the switch. The taps ran rust-colored for a minute and then cleared. Someone had been maintaining the plumbing throughout. The pantry held canned goods in neat rows with labels facing outward, arranged by category, all within their use-by dates. Not 12-year-old provisions. Someone had been coming through and replacing stock as needed, as part of the maintenance trust arrangement Sills had mentioned. They spent the remaining daylight getting 2 rooms to a habitable standard. The master bedroom upstairs held its furniture under drop cloths, and the cedar-lined dresser drawers opened onto clean folded linens that smelled of preservation rather than neglect. The mattress was covered in plastic sheeting and showed no damage. Someone had maintained these rooms with care. The smaller room next door had a window seat and built-in shelves. Lily walked into it and turned around once, and her expression communicated that the matter had been settled. Nora lit a fire in the sitting room fireplace from wood stacked in the box beside it. Dry hardwood split and stacked recently enough to still hold its weight, and she heated minestrone from the pantry on the old range, and they ate at the kitchen table with bread from a bag she had packed in Queens. Lily talked about the deer she had seen from the car window, and whether deer hibernated like bears or stayed active through winter, and Nora said she genuinely was not sure, and they discussed it at length without resolution, which was one of the better kinds of conversation there was. She was washing the bowls when headlights swept across the kitchen window. She got to the front door before the knock and opened it onto a man she had not yet met, but had already formed a clear picture of from Raymond Sills's careful phrasing. Gerald Calloway was 59 or 60. His coat was good wool, cashmere probably, worn in a way that communicated its cost without being subtle about it. He was heavy-set in a way that had been imposing once and was now something slightly less so. His face carried his father's jaw, which Nora recognized from the photographs she had found that afternoon in the obituary the Allentown paper had run. A severe, angular face with pale eyes and the expression of a person who kept everything they thought carefully behind their face. Gerald had the jaw. The eyes were different. They moved quickly, taking in the entrance hall over her shoulder with an assessment that was thorough and not casual, and then they came to her face. He did not offer his hand. She did not invite him in. He came inside anyway, stepping past her into the entrance hall with the ease of someone who did not expect physical spaces to deny him entry. He looked around. The fire in the sitting room cast light through the open doorway. The drop cloths Nora had removed from the furniture near the stairs were folded on the console table. Dust disturbed by a day of movement had settled into new configurations. Gerald's eyes moved through all of it and came to rest, finally, on the mirror at the far end of the hall. He looked at it longer than he looked at anything else. Something moved across his face. Nora caught it because she was watching him carefully, and anything that deviated from the contemptuous survey he had been conducting was information worth having. Whatever it was lasted no more than 2 seconds. It was not contempt. It was not calculation. It was closer to a reflex that his composure had not entirely managed to absorb. Something that did not belong in the expression of a man who had come here to assert a claim. Then it was gone, and he looked back at her. "I wanted to have this conversation before you got too settled," he said. "I have been here 6 hours. Enough to have heard from Sills." He clasped his hands at his waist with the posture of someone delivering a prepared position. "I will be direct. My father and I had an arrangement. This property was to be developed after his death. I have a buyer, a residential development group, that has been waiting on this land for 3 years. Their offer stands at $1 per million. Sills mentioned you would be filing a contest. I will be. But I am also making you an offer, directly, now, before the courts spend a year sorting this out." He looked around the entrance hall again, and when his eyes came back to her, they carried the patient reasonableness of a man who believed he was offering more than the other party deserved. "Sign the property over to me. I will give you $200,000 from the proceeds." Lily had appeared in the doorway from the sitting room. She did this when she heard adult voices, not from nosiness, but from the same observational pull that made her tap mirrors. Gerald glanced at her once and looked away. $1.4 million, Nora said. "You are offering me less than a seventh. The property needs substantial work before it can be sold through legitimate channels. I am absorbing that cost, the cost of the legal contest, the timeline risk. $200,000 is reasonable given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" He held her gaze steadily. "You have 2 months to raise $4,500 for a deposit on an apartment. I know what things cost, and I can see what you arrived here in." A brief pause, not cruel exactly, but precise. "My offer makes your problem go away today. The alternative is 90 days in a house that will find ways to cost you money you do not have, a legal contest you will spend those 90 days worried about, and an outcome at the end of it that is not guaranteed." She held the silence for a moment. "I will need to review everything with Sills," she said. He studied her face, finding the response less cooperative than he had expected. His jaw tightened slightly. "This house will defeat you financially," he said. Not as a threat, as a statement of fact, delivered with an evenness that was more disturbing than anger would have been. "My father built it to be difficult. I grew up knowing that." A pause. "Whatever you think you have inherited, it will not be what you are imagining." He left. She stood on the porch in the cold and watched his tail lights move down the lane and disappear around the first curve. And then she stood there an extra 30 seconds in the dark, listening to the November silence of the countryside. Wind in bare trees, the faint call of something wild and distant. "My father built it to be difficult." She went back inside. Lily was standing in front of the mirror. "That man," Lily said, without turning around. "He looked at this differently than he looked at everything else. I noticed that too. Like he was scared of it, but also like he wanted it." Lily's reflection faced her mother's reflection in the old glass. "Like Tyler at school, who acts tough, but you can tell he is actually nervous about something." "Maybe both," Nora said. Lily turned away from the mirror and went back to the sitting room and her book. Nora stood in the entrance hall alone, looking at the carved frame in the fire's light, and then she checked the fire screen and went upstairs. She lay in the master bedroom, listening to the house. Old joinery releasing the day's heat. A draft through the window, she had not been able to reseat fully in its frame. Something in the chimney flew, air moving through a passage and used for a decade. The house was not silent. It had individual sounds, distinct and separate, space between them. Her apartment building had been dense with noise, all of it pressing together until it became a constant, something the brain filed away and stopped processing. The manor's sounds were the opposite, each one its own thing. She fell asleep thinking about what Gerald had said. Built it to be difficult, not badly built, not a money pit through neglect. Built, past tense, with intention, to be difficult. That was a different claim entirely. Morning came gray and quiet. She made coffee and burned the toast in the old oven and found she had no internet because the satellite equipment was in the study and she needed to locate and configure it. She did that before 7:30 and had her phone connected to a slow but functional signal. Before we find out what happened next in the story, I want to take a brief moment to speak directly to anyone watching who might be going through their own sudden, overwhelming transition. If you are navigating a bitter divorce, the loss of a spouse, or a financial shock, you know the hardest part isn't just the money. It's not knowing what to do first. That is exactly why we created the Phoenix Blueprint. It is a practical, step-by-step guide for starting over. It doesn't have fluffy affirmations or vision boards. It is a tactical survival manual. It gives you the exact checklist for the first 48 hours, including the one rule you must follow. Do not make any decision you cannot reverse. It includes the Found Money worksheet, showing you exactly how to check state databases because 1 in 7 Americans actually has unclaimed money waiting for them right now. It even gives you word-for-word boundary scripts to use when family members pressure you for money or try to make decisions for you. You can get the entire guide right now for just $17. If you're watching on your TV, just pull out your phone, open your camera, and scan the QR code on the screen right now. If you're on a computer or phone, click the top link in the description. You don't have to figure this out alone. Now, let's get back to the story. Lily came downstairs at 7:20 looking rested and ready to investigate everything. They went through the house together, methodically, the way Nora approached problems she needed to understand before she could address them. The library first, because Lily pushed the door open before Nora could suggest otherwise. Floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls, every inch occupied. The books were in no discernible order: subject, author, size, and era, all mixed without pattern. She pulled volumes at random. Natural history, geology, a dense technical text on mineralogy with annotations in the margins, the handwriting cramped and precise, filling every available space. Mining engineering, 2 copies of the same edition, both heavily used. A history of diamond cutting in Antwerp. Gemology textbooks, the kind issued in professional certification courses, their spines cracked from heavy and repeated reading. Not a man who read broadly. A man who had read deeply in a specific area for a very long time. A locked cabinet occupied the corner of the library, flush against the wall in a way that was almost invisible. Almost. The lock mechanism was a shape she did not recognize from standard skeleton key profiles. She tried the handle and felt the resistance of a lock that had not turned in years. She did not have the key. She noted it and moved on. The study was off the entrance hall on the right side, and it was the room that had been deliberately cleared. The partner's desk was large, built for 2 people to work at from opposite sides, heavy mahogany, and it had been cleaned to bare wood. Not just dusty like every other surface in the house. Actually cleaned, at some point before the house was sealed. The drawers were empty. The shelves behind the desk were bare, the clean ghost shapes of departed books still visible against the slightly faded paint where they had stood for years. Every other room in the house held its contents intact. This room had been emptied on purpose. She stood in the study for a moment, thinking about what that meant, and then she went further back. Through a service door off the kitchen corridor, a utility space ran along the rear of the house, built for work of some kind. Heavy shelving on 2 walls. Equipment hung from pegs and arranged on shelves with the same precision that marked the pantry. But these were not household tools. Not carpentry, not plumbing, not the general maintenance equipment of a large rural property. She stood in front of the shelves for several minutes. Instruments of precise measurement that reminded her of surveying equipment she had seen in construction sites, but more refined, designed for smaller tolerances. Equipment that suggested work with heat, crucible holders, temperature gauges with ranges that extended well above anything domestic. Specialized containers sealed with mechanisms she could not immediately identify. Tools for cutting and polishing something harder than wood. A man who valued things more than people. Things that required this equipment. She went back through the house the way they had come, and Lily found a photograph in the library, tucked between a mineralogy text and the wall. A man in his 70s, white-haired, standing at the manor's front door with one hand resting on the door frame. His expression was entirely self-contained. Not proud, not sad, something that gave nothing away. "Is that grandfather?" Lily asked. "I think so." Lily studied it. "He looks like he is thinking about something else." "He does." They came back to the entrance hall as they kept coming back to it. the way a conversation returned to its central point regardless of diversions. The morning light was coming through the transom now, at a lower angle than the previous evening, falling across the mirror's aged glass and warming the backing so that it looked amber rather than just yellowed. Nora stood in front of it and looked at the carved frame properly for the first time. Not just acknowledging it, but looking. She had assumed the pattern was decorative and repeating, the way ornamental carving often used a motif carried around a frame. But looking carefully now, following one thread of the design from the lower left corner up and around the top and back down the right side, she could see that each section developed from the one before it. The geometric forms iterated rather than repeated, building on each other in sequence, each variation introducing a small change that accumulated over the frame's circumference into something substantially different from where it had started. Not decoration, something with a structure to it, something that meant something beyond what it looked like. She put her hand against the frame and felt the depth of the carving under her fingers, the sharp precision of the channels, the way the wood had been cut with complete control. Someone had spent considerable time and skill on this. The kind of skill that came from long and specific practice, like the tools in the utility room. Lily stood next to her. She looked at the mirror with the focused attention she gave to things that had presented her with a puzzle she wanted to solve. Then she stepped forward and tapped the glass with her knuckles. The sound came back. Wrong. Not glass over solid wall. Not glass over hollow plaster, which had its own tone. Something deeper, something with the resonance of a larger empty space, more volume than any wall cavity could account for. Lily tapped a second spot, lower, near the center of the glass. The same sound. She moved to a third spot, near the edge of the frame. Same again. Then she stepped to the side and tapped the frame itself, the dense carved wood. Solid, the clear compact sound of material with no space behind it. Back to the glass. She tapped in 4 different places in a methodical sweep across the lower half. Every spot returned the same deep resonance. She turned and looked at her mother with the expression of an 8-year-old who has already done the analysis and is waiting for the adult to arrive at the same conclusion. "Mom," Lily said, "the mirror isn't a mirror." Nora stood in front of the mirror for a long time after Lily said it. Not because she needed to think about whether Lily was right. The sound had been clear enough. What she was doing was remembering every time she had looked at this mirror since arriving. Every time her attention had been pulled back to it without her choosing, and understanding that she had been noticing something for 24 hours without knowing she was noticing it. A mirror that size on a wall that size should have anchored the room behind it. It should have felt fixed, final, part of the structure. Instead, it felt like an opening. She had read it that way from the moment she walked in, and had not known that was what she was reading. She walked the full length of the entrance hall and stood close to the frame. In the November morning light coming through the transom, the carved pattern was more complex than it had appeared from across the room. Each element had depth, the channels cut to different levels so that the pattern had topography, high points and low points, raised nodes where geometric forms intersected and deeper valleys between them. Running her fingers along it, as she did now, she could feel the precise differentiation between levels. Not random, too consistent for decoration alone, too deliberate. She worked her way around the frame slowly. Up the left side, across the top, down the right. At the base on the right side, approximately 18 inches from the corner, her fingers found something that stopped them. A seam. Hair thin, barely visible, following the outline of a single carved element. A small hexagonal form elevated slightly above the surrounding carving, about the size of a thumbnail. She ran her fingertip along the seam twice to confirm she was feeling what she thought she was feeling. Then she pressed the hexagon inward. It moved. For millimeters, perhaps, with a resistance that suggested a spring mechanism inside the frame. Then a faint click and a section of the carved border, the hexagon, and a small surrounding piece no larger than a playing card, opened outward on a tiny brass hinge, revealing a shallow compartment cut into the wood behind it. Inside the compartment, nestled in a piece of dense felt that had kept it from rattling for however many years it had been there, was a single key. Small. Unusual. The bow cut in an irregular profile she had seen once before that morning. The lock on the library cabinet. Lily was at her shoulder. She had been there since the sound, not hovering, just present, her breath slow and steady. What's that? A key he hid in the frame. Why would you hide a key in a mirror? Because you would need to know to look for it, Nora said. And most people would not know. The library cabinet opened on the first try once the key was seated in the lock. Smoothly, without protest, the mechanism well-oiled and recently serviced, part of whatever maintenance Edward had arranged for his life's work. She had expected dust inside. Instead, the hinges moved without resistance, and the interior was clean. 3 stacks of leather-bound volumes occupied the shelves, along with a sealed envelope. She understood what the volumes were from the first one she opened. Journals, Edward's journals, the handwriting the same cramped, precise hand she had seen filling the margins of the mineralogy books, but more personal here, less technical, recording something other than specimen observations. She set the envelope aside and opened the earliest volume. January 14th, 1962. I have taken possession of the manor. The price was less than it should have been given the structure, which tells me the previous owners did not understand what they had. The stone is exceptional. The foundations go to bedrock. What I need is already here. What I need is depth and isolation and time. He had known from the beginning what this house was for. She read forward through the first journal, not every entry, but enough to understand the shape of what Edward had been doing across 50 years in this building. He was a gemologist in the technical sense, with knowledge of gem formation, grading, identification, and cutting that the earliest entries made clear had been decades in the building before he purchased the manor. He wrote about specific stones the way certain people wrote about music or wilderness, with a precision that was also a form of attention, cataloging the internal characteristics of a stone, its inclusions and color distribution and crystal structure, with the focus of someone who found this the most interesting thing in the world and had organized his life accordingly. He had also been systematically acquiring. The acquisition record started in 1962 and occupied dedicated sections at the back of each journal. Every purchase documented: source, date, price paid, weight in carats, quality grade, notes on optical characteristics. He had been buying rough stones primarily, acquiring them at rough prices, and cutting them himself in the utility room she had explored that morning. He worked alone. That phrase appeared in different forms. Through the early journals. Alone, because he did not trust the judgment of others in this specific area, and because secrecy was the first condition of what he was building. What he was building was a private collection. Not displayed, not insured, not available to anyone. Held in a space only he occupied, added to over decades with the patience of someone who understood that significant wealth built slowly and kept invisible was more resilient than wealth that attracted attention. The envelope had her name on it. Not Nora. Her full name, Nora and Webb, née Calloway. The second name deliberate and certain. He had known exactly who she was. She opened it carefully. The letter inside was 2 pages, written in Edward's hand but slower than the journals, lighter in pressure, the writing of someone whose hands were no longer entirely steady. Dated 4 years ago, 3 years before his death. Dear Nora, it began. I do not expect you to know me, or to have any reason to think well of me. I am aware of what I am and what I failed at. I am asking you to read this anyway. She read all of it twice. Edward had driven Marion away. He was clear about that the way he was clear about everything in the journals, precise and unemotional in the delivery, which made it more rather than less credible. Marion had been 18 when the final break happened. She had wanted him to come to her school play. It conflicted with a trip he had planned to Antwerp to view a collection being sold privately. He had chosen Antwerp, not because he did not love Marion, because he did not know how to be in 2 places when one of those places held something that interested him completely and the other held something he did not know how to be present for. And he had made the wrong choice. And he had gone on making variations of the same wrong choice until Marion left and did not come back. He had hired someone to watch over Marion's life from a distance after that. Not to interfere, just to know she was alive and well. He knew about Nora's father, and about the marriage, and about the marriage ending. He knew about Lily. He had never tried to contact any of them because he understood, by then, that his absence was a kind of protection, that he was a man who chose things over people, and Marion had learned that early and saved herself by leaving, and he did not want to undo that work. But at the end, he could not leave everything to the foundation or to Gerald. He described Gerald in 2 sentences that told Nora everything she needed to know. Gerald is his mother's son, not mine. He has inherited her appetite without her patience. He had left it to Nora because she was Marion's daughter, because Marion was the person he had failed most completely, because this was the only form of apology available to a man who had spent his entire life communicating through objects rather than words. The final paragraph was brief. Behind the mirror is everything I built. I built it wrong, for the wrong reasons, in the wrong order, placing it ahead of the people who deserve to come first. It has no meaning except what you choose to give it. I hope you find a use for it that would have made Marion proud. I am sorry I never said this to her directly. I did not know how. Nora folded the letter and sat in the library chair without moving for a while. Marion had been right about her father. She had said a cold man who valued things more than people, and she had been right in every specific. And she had spent her whole life in Queens raising Nora and working and being practical and never once showing any of the bitterness she might have carried, and she had died at 53 without knowing any of this existed. Lily appeared in the doorway with a sandwich she had made herself from the kitchen supplies. She looked at her mother's face with the careful attention she had been applying to the house since they arrived. Are you okay? I am. Nora looked at her. I found a letter from your great-grandfather. He explained some things. Good things or bad things? Both, depending on how you look at them. Nora stood. He told me what is behind the mirror. Lily set down her plate immediately. What is? We have to find out for ourselves. He left instructions. The acquisition ledgers in the final volume covered 2008 through 2011, and on the last written page, dated 6 months before his stroke, Edward had noted his own estimate of the collection's current market value. He did this periodically through the journals, updating the figure every few years as he acquired more and as market valuations shifted. These running estimates were not guesses. They were the calculations of someone who had spent 50 years studying gem markets with the same systematic attention he applied to the stones themselves. The number on the last page was $262 million. That was 2011. Nora looked at it for a long time. She knew enough about gemstones, from the hour she had spent that morning working through the technical texts on his shelves, to understand that significant gem values did not behave like equity markets. They moved more slowly and more permanently. A fine cashmere sapphire or a Burmese ruby of exceptional quality did not depreciate in the way paper assets depreciated. Over a decade, a collection of this quality did not shrink. It grew, the way things of genuine rarity grew when the supply was fixed and the number of people who could afford them increased. $262 million in 2011. She was standing in this house in November, 12 years later. She went back to the diagram she had found in the back of the final journal. It showed the mirror's frame as a flattened schematic with 10 numbered points marked on it, each corresponding to a specific carved node in the pattern. Beside each number, a letter from A through J. The sequence was written below in Edward's hand. B, G, A, J, D, F, C, H, E, I. She memorized it on the walk from the library to the entrance hall. Lily came with her. Node B was in the upper left portion of the frame, a diamond-shaped element where 4 smaller forms converged, elevated slightly from the surrounding surface. Nora pressed it with the pad of her thumb. It moved inward with the same 4mm resistance as the compartment. A faint click from somewhere inside the frame. Node G. Right side, near the midpoint. A circular element with a hexagonal inner form. Pressed. Click. She worked through the sequence, Lily standing just behind her, close enough that Nora could feel her daughter's held breath with each press. 7, 8, 9. On the 10th node, the sound was different. Not a single click. A series of small, ordered sounds from within the frame, like the successive settling of a combination lock's final tumbler, and then a deeper resonance from the base of the mirror. A mechanical sound of something releasing that had been held. The mirror moved, not swinging outward, rotating. It was mounted on a central vertical axis, a pivot point at the exact center of its width, and as the mechanism released, the entire thing turned on that axis with a silence that was more startling than noise would have been. 6 feet of carved wood and aged glass rotating smoothly, perfectly balanced, the craftsmanship of the pivot engineering as exact as everything else Edward had built, until the edge had swung 45 degrees into the entrance hall, and the stone wall behind it was revealed to be a corridor entrance. Cool air came out of the corridor, dry and clean, cleaner than it should have been after 12 years of sealed isolation, which meant something was maintaining the climate inside that space. A dehumidification system, probably, on the same maintenance trust that kept the utilities going. And the smell that came with the cool air was the metallic quality she had noticed when she first walked through the front door, but stronger now, cleaner, no longer diluted by the rest of the house. Something she could almost name. Lily made a sound that was not quite a word. The corridor was stone-lined, the same fieldstone as the manor's walls, fitted with the same care. It ran 4 meters back before turning right, and along both walls, spaced at intervals, were LED light strips that activated as they entered, the light cool and white and entirely modern, a sharp contrast to the century-old stone around them. Edward had installed this system sometime in the last 20 years, practical and invisible, designed to serve rather than display. At the end of the corridor, a steel door. Not decorative. Functional, heavy gauge, set into a steel frame embedded in the stone, with a single keyhole in a standard profile. The second key on the cabinet ring. She had brought the ring. The key turned on the first try. The door opened inward on hydraulic hinges that controlled its speed regardless of how hard she pushed. A measured, regulated motion, and as it swung wide, the air from the room beyond moved out into the corridor, and the metallic smell arrived fully. She understood it now. Precious metals and cut stone, held in a temperature-stable sealed space for decades, produced a specific quality of air that was not quite like anything else. She had not known that before this moment. She knew it now. The vault room was not small. She had expected a room. What she found was a space extending beneath the manor's east wing, built into the bedrock, substantially larger than the footprint of any single room upstairs. 20 feet across, 40 feet long, the ceiling stone and arched, the arches showing the same fitted stone craftsmanship as the manor's exterior walls. The floor was sealed stone, smooth and practical. The LED strips here were the same cool white as the corridor, activating as they entered, and they and Lily stood just inside the door and looked at what 50 years of Edward Calloway's attention had produced. Cabinet units ran along both walls, floor to ceiling, with shallow drawers in the lower sections and glass-fronted sections above. Central shelving occupied the room's length in 2 rows, holding metal cases and sealed containers stacked in systematic order. Every surface was labeled. Every label carried a code in Edward's cramped, precise hand that corresponded to the acquisition entries in the journals upstairs. Lily walked forward slowly into the room, her sneakers quiet on the sealed floor, looking from side to side with the expression she wore at museums, taking everything in without touching, understanding on some level that this was a place where how you moved mattered. Nora went to the nearest drawer in the left wall cabinet and pulled it open. The interior was divided into padded compartments, each fitted to hold a single stone. 40 compartments in the drawer, each one occupied. The stones were cut and finished, some set in simple wire settings that were functional rather than decorative, designed to keep each stone oriented and protected. They were diamonds. She could see that immediately from the way the LED light moved in them, the internal dispersal through facets that was completely distinct from every other material. Not the small commercial diamonds of jewelry counters. These were substantial. The smallest in the drawer was at least 2 carats by her untrained estimate. Several were considerably larger. One in the center of the drawer caught the light differently from the rest, a stone the size of a thumbnail joint, colorless in the way of exceptional colorless stones, a different colorless from ordinary glass. She closed that drawer and opened the one below it. Colored stones, sorted by type, each section labeled in the drawer's front panel. Rubies in the left section, a deep red that was not quite the red of anything else in the natural world. Sapphires in the center, including several that were not blue but shades of yellow and pink in the Padparadska color she had seen described in one of Edward's annotated books as rarer and more valuable than most blue stones. Emeralds. On the right, deep green with the particular internal garden of inclusions that distinguished the finest natural stones from synthetic alternatives. Lily came to stand beside her. She looked into the open drawer with the complete focus of an 8-year-old who has encountered something genuinely new. "Mama," she said quietly. She had not used that word since she was 4. "I know," Nora said. The next section held cut tourmalines and alexandrites and stones Nora could not immediately identify from the technical reading she had done that morning. The section after held rough material, uncut stones in sealed containers, acquired but never worked, the inventory of a man whose plans had been interrupted by a stroke before they were finished. The central shelving held the metal cases. She opened the nearest one on its small latch. Inside, nested in custom foam, were gold ingots, small and standardized, each approximately the size of a smartphone and far heavier, each stamped with a purity mark and a date. The earliest date she could read was 1968. The most recent was 2009. She opened a second case. More ingots. The same standardization, the same precision of storage. She walked the full length of the room. The scale became real in steps, each step making the previous estimate look insufficient. A collection this size was not accumulated casually or quickly. It was the product of someone who had treated acquisition as a discipline, buying when the opportunity was right, waiting when it was not, building over decades with the patience of a person who thought in long timelines and did not need anyone else to understand what he was doing. At the far end of the room, one section of the cabinet was devoted entirely to stones Edward had labeled as exceptional single pieces, items given individual documentation rather than batch records. She pulled the handle of the largest drawer in this section. Inside, 7 stones in individual padded compartments, each with a small card in Edward's handwriting noting acquisition details and his own assessment. The largest was a rough diamond, uncut, the size of a walnut, its exterior surface carrying a yellowish cast that in rough stones either meant very little or meant something extraordinary, depending on what was concealed inside. She stood in the middle of the vault room and breathed. Edward had written, "I built it wrong, for the wrong reasons, in the wrong order." He had also built it right in every technical detail. The construction of the vault, the organization of the inventory, the climate control, the cross-referencing between physical collection and written record. All of it was the work of someone who had applied total attention to one thing for 50 years and had understood exactly what he was doing at every step. She photographed everything, systematically, going through every drawer and case and label, building a visual record that matched the written record in the acquisition journals upstairs. It took 2 hours. At some point, Lily sat down against the wall and fell genuinely asleep, her head tipped against the stone, which was its own measure of how long it took. Nora called Raymond Sills from the vault room. The satellite connection reached this far through a cable Edward had run through the corridor. He answered on the second ring. She told him what she had found. The silence that followed lasted long enough that she checked the call had not dropped. "Nora." His voice was careful and even. "I need you to describe what you are seeing in more detail." She described it. The dimensions of the room. The cabinet units. The content of the first 3 drawers she had opened. The central shelving with the metal cases. The section of exceptional single pieces. The rough yellow diamond. Another silence. "Do not remove anything from that room," he said finally. "Do not touch anything beyond what you have already handled. I am going to arrange an appraisal, and until that appraisal is complete and documented, this information stays between you and me." A pause. "I have a colleague in Philadelphia. He is the best gemologist in private practice in this region. I will have him there within 48 hours. She asked about Gerald's legal challenge. "Formally filed 3 days ago. We have a court date in 81 days. His position is that Edward was not of sound mind when he changed the will, that the decision to leave everything to a granddaughter he had never met was the action of a man compromised by age and isolation." Sills spoke carefully. "The existence of this collection, if it is what you are describing, changes the nature of those proceedings entirely. A man who maintained a documented collection of this complexity was not cognitively impaired. The organization you are describing, the cross-referencing between physical inventory and written records, represents decades of consistent, sophisticated thinking. Gerald's central argument does not survive contact with that evidence." She carried Lily upstairs at 9 that night, her daughter warm and heavy against her shoulder. She put her to bed in the room with the window seat and went back downstairs and locked the vault door and walked back through the corridor and watched the mirror swing closed on its pivot, the mechanism resetting with that series of small ordered clicks, the glass settling back against its frame until the entrance hall looked exactly as it had when they arrived. The wall at the end of the hall, the aged reflection in old glass, the carved frame with its iterating pattern. She stood in the entrance hall in the quiet of the house and thought about Edward Calloway standing in this same spot, probably thousands of times across 50 years, looking at this same mirror with the knowledge of what was behind it. A man who had built something and kept it invisible from everyone, who had driven his daughter away and watched her life from a distance and made no attempt to speak until he had a pen in his hand and a letter he could leave behind instead. He had trusted the right things to outlast him. The question of whether the right things were the stones or the letter was one she could not answer yet. Gerald came back in the morning. She was at the kitchen table with coffee when she heard 2 cars come up the lane. Not one. Gerald's sedan and a second vehicle, a pickup truck with a contractor's logo on the door panel, carrying a man in work clothes with a clipboard and the professional neutrality of someone paid not to take sides. Gerald stood on the porch and said the structural engineer had been ordered by the court as part of the discovery process in the will contest. Standard procedure in contested estate proceedings. The engineer had a right to assess the property's condition. She called Sills while Gerald waited. Sills confirmed it. She let them in. The engineer moved through the ground floor with methodical efficiency, testing outlets, examining window frames, measuring wall thicknesses in the kitchen and noting where they exceeded structural requirements. The punky porch boards were documented. The single-pane windows. The dated electrical panel. Gerald followed close behind, narrating problems in the tone of someone making a case rather than a concern. When they reached the entrance hall, Gerald stopped. He looked at the mirror the way he had looked at it before. The controlled survey fractured for a moment into something else, the same flicker Nora had seen on his first evening here. And then he composed himself and looked at her. "Has anyone been in here since I visited?" he said. "Lily and me." His jaw moved slightly. His eyes went back to the mirror and stayed there for several seconds. "My father spoke about this house before his stroke," he said. "He told me there was something here worth keeping. He would not tell me what or where. He said I had to earn the right to know." The last sentence came out with a specific quality of old bitterness, carefully maintained. "I spent 15 years waiting for him to tell me, and he never did." Nora said nothing. "When the court rules in my favor, I will find it," Gerald said. "Whatever is here, I will find it. The court has not ruled yet. 81 days. He said it as a statement of fact, the same way he had delivered every fact since he first stood on her porch. After 81 days, this becomes a different conversation. He left with the structural engineer's report. Whatever the report contained, it was now opposing evidence in a contest that was about to become considerably more complicated than Gerald understood. The gemologist arrived 47 hours after Nora's call to Sills, driving from Philadelphia in a dark blue car that he parked with deliberate care alongside the porch. His name was Daniel Park. He was 51 years old, and he carried 2 cases of equipment that he handled the way surgeons handled instruments, with the attention of someone who understood exactly what each piece was worth and what it was for. He was not a large man, but he moved with the deliberate efficiency of long specialized practice. His eyes, when they first looked at Nora, were assessing and careful. The eyes of someone who spent his professional life distinguishing between things that looked similar but were not. Sills had told him only that an estate appraisal was needed. He had not told him what he would be appraising. She took him to the entrance hall. He looked at the carved frame with the expression she recognized from her own first close examination. The narrowing focus of someone who has recognized something unusual and is deciding how seriously to take that recognition. Then she pressed the sequence of nodes, B through I in order, and the mirror rotated on its axis, and the corridor opened. Daniel Park looked at the corridor for 4 seconds without speaking. Then he picked up his cases and followed her through. She unlocked the vault door, and it swung on its hydraulic hinges at its measured pace, and the lights came on, and he walked into the room and stopped. He stood still for almost a minute. Nora counted, because there was nothing else to do while she waited for him to begin processing what he was looking at. Then he set his cases down, opened the nearest one, put on a pair of thin cotton gloves, and began. He worked for 7 hours that first day. Nora stayed in the vault room, sitting against the wall in the corner, available if he needed anything but not intruding, watching a professional move through Edward's collection with the focused silence of work that required total concentration. He pulled drawers and held stones under his loupe and made notes in a system she could not follow but which was clearly organized. Occasionally he set a stone aside in a tray he had labeled, stones requiring additional examination or independent lab assessment. Lily came down at noon and sat with her mother and watched Daniel Park work. She watched him with the same focused attention she had given the mirror, not asking questions, just observing, understanding that some things communicated themselves better through watching than through being explained. Around the 5th hour, he opened the drawer of exceptional single pieces, the ones Edward had individually documented. He lifted the large rough diamond from its compartment with both gloved hands and held it under his loupe for a long time, longer than anything else he had examined. When he set it down, his hands were not entirely steady. He did not say anything. He went back to work. At the end of 7 hours, he packed his notes, removed his gloves, and stood in the middle of the vault room. He looked at the cabinet units along the walls. He looked at the central shelving. He looked at the labeled cases stacked in order. "How long has this collection been here?" he asked. "Since the early 1960s. He spent 50 years building it." Daniel Park was quiet for a moment. "Who else knows about this room?" "My attorney. Me. Lily." She paused. "My grandfather's other son knows something is here. He does not know what or where." "That man who is contesting the will." "Yes." Daniel Park looked at his notes and then looked at the room again. "I need 2 more days to complete a full assessment. I need to send 3 of the stones to a certified lab for independent confirmation, the larger individual pieces specifically." He said this with the precision of someone who understood that his word was not enough for what he was about to say. "I can give you a preliminary range now." "Please," Nora said. "I want to be clear that this number will change once the lab confirms. It could move in either direction, though I think I know which direction." He looked at his notes. "I have appraised privately held gem collections for 30 years. I have never encountered a private collection of this scale or this quality. I want you to understand that before I give you the number, because the number is going to be difficult to process without that context." He looked at her directly. "Preliminary range, accounting for the portions I have not yet reached. Between $340 million and $430 million at current market valuations." He paused. "The rough yellow diamond alone, if it proves to be what I believe it to be, could represent $60 to $80 million of that figure independently. The clarity and size of the rough material suggests a type II stone of exceptional quality. Those are extremely rare in private collections." The numbers settled into the vault room and stayed there. $340 million. $430 million. Lily was sitting against the wall with her legs crossed, looking at Daniel Park and then at her mother. "Is it a lot?" she asked. Nora thought about how to answer that in a way that was honest without being overwhelming, in a way that an 8-year-old could hold without being changed too much too fast. She thought about the pearl earrings. She thought about the $180 monthly payments eating slowly at a $12,400 balance while interest moved the other direction. She thought about the eviction notice on the kitchen counter in Queens and the storage unit at $89 a month, and the way she had sat at the kitchen table in November adding up numbers that would not add up to anything good. She thought about Edward's letter, the only form of apology available to a man who had spent his entire life communicating through objects rather than words. "Yes," she said. "It's a lot." Daniel Park returned the following morning with the same 2 cases and a third one he had not brought the first day. He worked through the sections he had not yet reached, methodically and without hurry, adding to the tray of stones set aside for lab assessment and making notes in his careful system. Nora worked alongside him that second day, not appraising but cataloging, cross-referencing his section work against the acquisition ledger entries in the journals, building the comparison that would demonstrate to the court the coherence of Edward's record-keeping across 5 decades. The coherence was absolute. Every stone Daniel Park examined had a corresponding ledger entry. Every ledger entry corresponded to a labeled compartment or case. The system had no gaps. The documentation was not the work of a man in cognitive decline. It was the work of someone who understood that a collection this significant required records this thorough, and who had maintained that standard from the first entry in 1962 to the last in 2011. On the morning of the 3rd day, Sills drove from Allentown and sat at the kitchen table with his coffee while Daniel Park prepared the formal preliminary appraisal document. The 2 men had worked together before. Nora gathered from the shorthand in their exchanges, the mutual professional respect of people who had done complicated things together and come out right. Daniel Park set the document on the table. The summary figure, pending independent lab confirmation on 14 stones, was $387 million. Sills read it. His face did not change in the way of a man trained to receive information without broadcasting a response. He set the document down and was quiet for a moment. "This," he said, very carefully, "changes the nature of the proceedings." Gerald's legal challenge had been built around a $240,000 rural property. His attorneys had constructed their case on the claim that Edward Calloway had not been of sound mind when he changed his will, that leaving everything to a granddaughter he had never met was the confused action of an isolated elderly man whose judgment had been compromised by age. The vault room made that argument impossible to sustain. 50 years of documented acquisition. An inventory system maintained to professional standards across 5 decades without a single year of disruption. An appraisal from one of the most respected gemologists in private practice in the Northeast, arriving at a figure that would require the court to reconceptualize entirely what the Calloway estate actually was. No man whose faculties were failing maintained this. No one in cognitive decline organized a collection to this standard in the final years they were able to work in it. "I need to notify the court of this discovery," Sills said. Under Pennsylvania estate law, a find of this nature within the estate property must be formally reported. "Once I file, Gerald's attorneys will see the appraisal." He looked at Nora across the table. "He is going to escalate." "I know." His entire position changes the moment he understands what he is actually contesting. He filed this challenge believing he was fighting over a property worth $250,000. He is about to learn what his father actually spent 50 years building. Sills gathered his papers. At the door, he paused. "Your grandfather was very specific about the 90-day requirement," he said. "He knew Gerald would challenge. He knew Gerald would move. Quickly. He needed you to have time in this house, finding what he had left, establishing your presence and your claim, before Gerald could find a mechanism to stop it." Sills looked at the entrance hall, at the mirror at its far end. He built the protection around the collection the same way he built everything else. With patience. With time. After he left, Nora stood in the entrance hall alone. Lily was in the kitchen eating a bowl of cereal, filling the quiet of the house with the particular small sounds of a child occupied and content, spoon against ceramic, the periodic sound of the refrigerator she had opened and not fully closed. Nora looked at the mirror. $387 million. Behind the carved frame and the aged glass and the pivot mechanism Edward had designed and the sequence of 10 nodes he had hidden in the pattern and the letter he had left in the cabinet that only someone with the key could reach, which was itself hidden in the frame, you would only find if you looked closely enough or listened to an 8-year-old who had noticed that the sound coming back from the glass was wrong. Marion had left Pennsylvania at 19 and built a life from nothing, raising Nora alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, buying canned goods 3 jars at a time when they went on sale, passing down pearl earrings instead of explanations, and dying at 53 before she could know any of this existed. Nora put her hand flat against the glass, the way Lily had done on the afternoon they arrived. Cold. Old glass was always cold. She had come here with $1,847 and an eviction notice and 2 suitcases and a daughter who noticed things other people walked past. She had come here because the arithmetic in Queens had only one answer and it was not a good one. She had come because she had no better option and because some part of her, the part she had inherited from Marion who inherited it from a man she had been right to leave, did not give up on things before she understood exactly what they were. Behind the mirror that was not a mirror, under the fieldstone floor of the East Wing, in a room built to outlast its builder, a lifetime's worth of wrong choices had been converted into the only right one Edward Calloway had managed to make. 79 days remained until the court hearing. Gerald was about to find out what he was actually fighting over. And somewhere in Philadelphia, a laboratory was preparing to open a sealed container holding a rough yellow diamond the size of a walnut to determine whether what was inside it matched what Daniel Park believed it to be. The answer to that question would arrive in 10 days. Nora already knew she would not be leaving when it did. The 10 days between Daniel Park's preliminary assessment and the laboratory's confirmation moved with the particular quality of time spent waiting for something important. Slow in the moment. Fast in retrospect. Nora worked through them. She set up a proper workspace in the library, her laptop connected to the satellite router. The mineralogy text she had no more reason to avoid pushed to one end of the desk to make room. She reached out to two former clients from before Harmon Creative had collapsed, smaller brands that had liked her work and might still need design. One wrote back within a day. The other took 3 days and came back with a project. The first paid $600 and the second would pay $800 on delivery, which was not large but was real and was hers. And it meant she could buy groceries without calculating what she could not afford this week versus what had to wait. Lily enrolled at the Hales Crossing Elementary School on day 12 of their residency. The school was small, 180 students across all grades, with the atmosphere of a rural school where everyone knew everyone and newcomers were noticed without being unwelcoming. Lily navigated it the way she navigated most environments, by observing carefully before she spoke. And within a week, she had made 2 friends. A girl named Cass who lived on a farm outside town and shared Lily's interest in animals. A boy named Theo who had impressed her by being able to identify 12 types of cloud formations by sight. Patsy Burke showed up at the manor on day 14 with a covered dish of chicken and noodles and the frank manner of someone delivering an obligation rather than making a gesture. "You've been eating from those cans in the pantry," Patsy said, looking at the kitchen. "That's not a problem I can leave alone." She stayed for an hour. She told Nora about the town, the families who had been there for generations, and the smaller number who had arrived more recently, about the way Edward Calloway had been regarded by the community for 40 years, which was a mixture of respect and puzzlement. He had been orderly and punctual and completely impenetrable. He had bought supplies from the hardware store and the farm supply and paid cash and never once accepted an invitation to anything. "People thought he was lonely," Patsy said, with the tone of someone who had thought otherwise. "I always figured he was satisfied. Lonely people want company and can't find it. Satisfied people have what they want and don't need anything else." She paused. "Turns out what he wanted was that house. Whatever was in it." "You knew something was there?" Nora said. "I knew he wasn't doing nothing up there." Patsy folded her hands on the kitchen table. "A man drives to Harrisburg to hire workers so his neighbors can't see what he's having done to his own property. That's a man protecting something. I just didn't know what." She looked at Nora directly. "What was it?" Nora told her enough. Not the specific number. The shape of it. Edward had been a gemologist, had spent 50 years acquiring a collection, had hidden it in a vault beneath the manor, had left it to Nora. Patsy received this with the stillness of someone filing important information carefully. "Gerald Calloway came into my diner twice last month," she said, "asking questions about you. What kind of person you were. Whether you seemed stable. Whether you had talked to anyone in town about the property." Her expression was not warm toward the memory. "I told him you seemed like someone who knew what she was doing and that I didn't involve myself in family matters." She stood to leave. "But I will tell you this. Whatever he's after, this town watched Edward Calloway for 40 years. We know what that house was to him. Nobody in Hale's Crossing is going to help Gerald Calloway take it." The lab results arrived on day 23. Daniel Park called at 8:30 in the morning. Nora was at the kitchen table with coffee and the window showing her a November sky that had shifted from gray overnight to a pale, clean winter blue. "The 14 stones have been fully assessed," he said. "I want to go through the complete breakdown with you, but I will start with the stone you are most likely to be thinking about." She was. "The rough diamond," he said. 247 carats. Type IA confirmed. Fancy intense yellow, natural color origin, no treatments of any kind. He paused for exactly the length of time required to let those words settle. When cut by a skilled cutter, that stone should yield a primary gem somewhere between 90 and 110 carats, depending on the inclusions in the rough and the cutter's judgment about preserving weight versus optimizing proportions. A fancy, intense yellow diamond of that size and quality has no real comparable in recent private sale history. My conservative estimate for the cut stone is $74 million. With the right buyer and the right sale structure, it could exceed $90 million. Nora set down her toast and did not pick it up again. "The other 13 stones confirm and in several cases exceed my preliminary estimates," Daniel continued. "The Burmese ruby in the exceptional pieces section is a 14-carat unheated stone with color saturation I have not seen outside of institutional collections. The Kashmir sapphire cluster in drawer 7 represents the most significant accumulation of Kashmir material in private hands that I am aware of. A pause. The final authenticated total, incorporating the lab confirmation on all 14 stones and accounting for every item in the collection. $390. For million at current market valuations. $390 million for $100,000. Nora sat in the kitchen of the manor house in rural Pennsylvania. In the kitchen with the thick walls and the outdated range, and the pantry with its organized cans, and she held the phone and waited for the number to settle into some recognizable relationship with reality. Nora, Daniel Parks said, with the careful professionalism of someone who understood that the figure he had just spoken was outside most human frameworks for processing. Are you there? I'm here. I want to be clear about one more thing, he said. The values I have given you are conservative. I use conservative estimates in formal appraisals because I believe in precision over optimism. In an open market, with the right representation and sufficient time to find the appropriate buyers for individual pieces, this collection could achieve significantly more. The yellow diamond alone may exceed any estimate I have given. She thanked him and ended the call. She sat at the kitchen table for a while without moving. Lily came downstairs at 8:15 for school, her backpack on, her hair in a single braid she had done herself, and that was mostly successful. She looked at her mother's face with the focused attention she had been applying to Nora since they arrived here, always looking for the thing her mother was not quite saying. Did something happen? The diamond results came back. Lily sat down across from her. Was it the good kind? The very good kind. How much? The whole collection is worth $390 million. Lily was quiet for a moment, not processing the money itself, Nora thought, but processing what the money meant, which was a more complicated calculation and one that an 8-year-old was approaching from a direction an adult might not think to use. So we don't have to leave, Lily said. No. Good. Lily picked up her backpack. Cass said I can see their horse on Saturday. After Lily left, Nora called Raymond Sills. He filed the amended response to Gerald's challenge that afternoon, attaching Daniel Parks' complete appraisal documentation and the lab confirmation reports on all 14 stones. The formal filing changed the character of the court record from a dispute over a rural property to something the court had not anticipated when it set the hearing date, and Sills said, with a directness he did not usually permit himself, that Gerald's attorneys were going to have a difficult morning when they read it. Gerald's attorney called Nora directly 3 hours after the filing, which was procedurally improper and which Sills addressed in a separate communication. The call was brief. The attorney's voice had the controlled tension of someone delivering a message he had not written. He said Gerald was prepared to revise his offer substantially in light of the new information, that a private settlement was in everyone's interest, that Gerald wished to discuss terms. Nora said she would have Raymond Sills respond to any formal settlement offer Gerald chose to make. The attorney said Gerald was prepared to be generous. She said she would have Raymond Sills respond and ended the call. The emergency discovery motion Gerald's attorneys filed 2 days later was denied within 72 hours. The denial was brief. The estate's contents had been professionally appraised and formally documented. There was no basis for emergency discovery beyond what had already been disclosed. The scheduled hearing date would proceed as planned. Gerald's attorneys filed 3 procedural challenges over the following 2 weeks. Each was addressed and dismissed within days. They were not strong motions, Sills told Nora. They were delay tactics, each one buying a few days at most. He is running out of room, and he knows it, Sills said. The hearing is in 44 days. The 90-day residency requirement completes in 53. He needs to stop you before you meet the requirement. He cannot do that through legitimate legal channels, and he knows he cannot. These filings are something to do while he waits. A local contractor named Eddie had started on the porch boards the week after the court dismissed the structural engineer's report, working on weekends at a pace Nora could manage with what she had on hand. He was in his mid-50s, efficient and without excess conversation, the kind of tradesman who communicated primarily through the quality of his work. He replaced the worst of the boards first, working section by section, and by week 6 the porch was solid across its full length. Gerald came to the manor on a Thursday evening in week 7. Alone this time. No attorneys, no engineers. She heard the car on the lane before the headlights appeared, and she was at the door before he knocked, because she had learned his approach. He looked different than he had on either of his previous visits. Not smaller exactly, but less composed. The wool coat was the same, but the man inside it had spent 7 weeks in a kind of stress that showed in the set of his jaw and in his eyes, which had lost the quick calculating quality and looked instead like someone who had been revising something fundamental about how they understood their own life. She did not invite him in. They stood on the repaired porch in the December cold. He looked at the front of the manor for a moment, not assessing it, just looking, the way you looked at something you had thought about for a long time. He told me there was something here, Gerald said. Before his stroke, he told me the house held something he had spent his life building. He said it was the one thing he had built that would outlast him. He would not tell me what it was. He said I had to earn the right to know, and that I had to figure out what earning it meant. A pause. I spent 15 years trying to figure that out, and failing. She waited. 3 months before he died, I found a developer who wanted this land. A residential project, 400 units. I thought I was doing him a favor, arranging things, making sure the estate would be handled properly after he was gone. Gerald's voice was controlled, but the effort of keeping it that way was visible. I went to the care facility, and I told him what I had arranged. That I had a buyer. That the property would be developed. That he would not need to worry about what happened to it. He looked at her directly for the first time since he had arrived. He changed the will the following week, Gerald said. He put you in it the week after I told him I had arranged to sell the thing he had spent 50 years building. He had never mentioned you before. Not once, across all the years I visited him, had he mentioned Marion or Marion's daughter. And then, the week after I showed him that I did not understand what the house was, you appeared in his will. Nora looked at him steadily. He left it to you because you had not tried to take it from him, Gerald said. That is the only reason. Not because he knew you. Not because of any great feeling for Marion, though I believe he had some feeling for her, in the only way he knew how to have feelings for anyone. Because I had shown him that I would sell the one thing he cared about and call it help, and you had never done anything to him at all. He was quiet for a moment in the cold. I am not asking you for anything, he said. I wanted you to understand that. I am not here to make another offer. The attorneys will do what they will do at the hearing because that is what I am paying them to do, and because I have not yet managed to stop doing that. But I came here because I wanted you to know what he was. Not what the journals say, what he actually was. Tell me, she said. Gerald looked out at the dark grounds, at the shapes of the old hardwoods against the night sky. He was a man who loved beautiful things the way other men love their families. He was not capable of the other kind of love. He knew it. It was not an excuse, and he knew it was not an excuse. He spent his whole life building something with that love because the collection was the only place it worked. A breath. He was not a good father. He was not a good husband. He was an extraordinary gemologist, and he was honest with himself about his limitations, which is more than most people manage. She thought about the letter. I built it wrong, for the wrong reasons, in the wrong order. He knew what he had done, she said. He did. For a long time. Gerald's expression shifted into something that was not quite grief, but was adjacent to it. It did not change what he chose. But he knew. He left after that. He drove down the lane at the same measured pace he always used, as if hurrying would imply more feeling than he wanted to show, and the taillights disappeared around the first curve and did not return. Nora stood on the porch for a while after he was gone. He had inherited his father's appetite without his patience, Edward had written. That was probably true. But Gerald had also inherited something of his father's self-awareness, the capacity to understand clearly what you were and what you had done, and to say it plainly to someone with every reason to dismiss it. That was not nothing. The court hearing was on day 79 of the 90-day requirement. She drove to Allentown with Sills, leaving Lily with Patsy for the morning. The courtroom was small and plain, a working room rather than an impressive one, with a judge and chairs and the focused attention of people doing specific work. Gerald's attorneys presented their case with the thoroughness of people who had prepared extensively for a better set of facts than they currently possessed. The incompetency argument rested on Edward's increasing isolation in his final years, his decision to liquidate all financial assets in the years before his stroke, his habit of working alone in a property where no one from the outside world could observe him. They called this pattern erratic. They called it the behavior of a man whose judgment had deteriorated. Sills presented the acquisition ledgers. 50 years of records. Every entry dated, sourced, and cross-referenced to the physical inventory with the consistency of someone who had understood from the beginning that documentation was the only protection against chaos. The running valuation estimates updated periodically across 5 decades, each estimate accurate relative to the market conditions of its time, the work of someone who tracked gem markets with professional rigor. The ledger entries from the final journal, completed 6 months before his stroke, as meticulous as any entry from 1968 or 1975 or 1992. No degradation, no pattern of deteriorating judgment. A consistent, sophisticated intelligence operating at the same standard it had always maintained, until the stroke ended it. He presented Edward's physician's competency assessment, dated 30 days before the will revision. Sound mind confirmed in writing by a doctor who had treated Edward for 3 years and had no stake in the estate's outcome. He presented Daniel Park's appraisal with the full laboratory documentation, $390 for million in authenticated assets. The organized complexity of the vault room's inventory system, cross-referenced and labeled and maintained without interruption across 5 decades. The work of someone who understood exactly what he possessed and exactly how to preserve it. He presented Edward's letter to Nora. The judge read it, then reviewed the summary of the ledger evidence, then looked at Gerald's attorneys with an expression that communicated, without words, the difficulty of their position. The contest was dismissed in 40 minutes. Gerald sat at the opposing table when the ruling was read and did not look at Nora. He looked at the surface in front of him with the expression of a man revising something fundamental about how he had understood his own life. Not all of it was grief for what he had lost. Some of it was something more complicated, something closer to what he had said on the porch about his father and the limits of what his father had been capable of, and about the limits of what Gerald himself had been capable of in 40 years of wanting something he had not understood. She did not speak to him. There was nothing to say that had not already been said on a cold porch in December. The 90-day requirement was met on day 88. Sills came to the manor that morning with the title transfer documents. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Nora had been eating toast when the lab results came in, and she signed the documents that made Calloway Manor and its 22 acres and the vault beneath its east wing legally hers. Not conditionally, fully and permanently. Sills capped his pen. "What happens next?" she said, in practical terms. In terms of the collection, Daniel Park recommends working with 2 auction houses for the major pieces and taking 18 to 24 months to bring the collection to market. Flooding a market with this volume at once depresses prices. Thoughtful sequencing maximizes return. He paused. "In terms of the property, that is your decision. What would you like to do?" She had been thinking about this for several weeks. She wanted to stay in Pennsylvania, for now. Not permanently, not as a final answer, but for now. Lily liked the school and had made real friends and had spent a Saturday at Cass's farm meeting the horse, which had gone well by any measure. The manor needed proper restoration, the kind of work that required time and expertise, and which she now had the means to fund correctly. She also wanted to establish a foundation, not in Edward's name, in Marion's. Something real to start with, something modest and specific. Scholarship funding for first-generation college students in the region, because Marion had been a first-generation student herself, the daughter of a man who had chosen stones over people, who had gotten herself to Queens and built a life and raised a daughter to know that you did not give up on things before you understood exactly what they were. She told Sills. He wrote it down and said he knew the right people for establishing a charitable structure. After he left, she called the hospital billing department from the front porch steps. She gave the account number and her payment information. $12,400 plus the accumulated interest from 8 months of $180 monthly payments that had barely touched the principal. The representative on the line confirmed the balance, processed the payment, confirmed it had cleared, and said in the practiced tone of someone who spent their days talking to people for whom this moment was not so simple, "Your account is paid in full. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" There was not. She sat on the repaired porch boards for a few minutes after, in the December afternoon with the pale winter light moving across the manor's stone facade. The number that had sat in the corner of every financial calculation she had run for 8 months was gone. Not deferred, not restructured. Gone. Lily came out the front door with a snack and sat down beside her. "What are you doing?" Thinking. About what? About a number that's not there anymore. She looked at her daughter. The hospital bill. I paid it off. Lily considered this. All of it. All of it. Good, Lily said and bit into her apple. Later that afternoon, after Lily had gone to do her homework at the library desk she had claimed as her own workspace, Nora went down to the vault room one more time. Not for the appraisal. Not to photograph or document. She had a feeling she had not fully examined one corner, the small cabinet built flush into the far wall that she had opened during the initial assessment, but had not pulled every drawer of because Daniel Park had been working in that section and she had not wanted to interrupt him. The vault room was the same as it had always been. LED lights activating as she entered, the cabinet units along the walls, the central shelving with its labeled cases. The temperature stable and dry, the climate control system running quietly, the smell of precious metals and stone that she had learned to recognize as the specific atmosphere of this place. She went to the far corner cabinet and crouched down to reach the bottom drawer. It was narrower than the others, tucked low near the floor in a way that required crouching, the kind of drawer that would be easy to overlook in a room with more obvious things to examine. Inside, not gemstones, not gold, a wooden box, small, perhaps 8 inches long, 6 inches wide, old wood, the kind of old that came from being held by the same hands for a long time. Carved initials on the lid. M.C. Marion Calloway. She carried it to the center of the room and sat down on the sealed stone floor and opened it. For photographs. The first, a baby in white cotton, the arms holding her belonging to a woman whose face was outside the frame. The second, a girl of perhaps 5 or 6 standing in a garden with a man who was recognizably Edward, younger than in any other photograph Nora had seen of him, the two of them looking at something to the left of the camera. Marion's face was turned toward her father and her expression was unguarded and happy, the expression of a child who has not yet learned to be afraid of anything, not yet aware of anything that would come later. Edward's expression was the one Nora recognized, self-contained, focused on whatever held his attention off to the side. But his hand was resting on Marion's shoulder. He had been there. He had been present, once. The third photograph had been clipped from something printed, a graduation picture, Marion in a cap and gown, smiling at the camera with the particular happiness of someone who had gotten somewhere despite the odds. This would have been after she left Pennsylvania, after the distance between them had hardened into permanence. The fourth photograph showed a woman Nora recognized immediately from the coat she was wearing, because that coat had hung on the back of a door in the Queen's apartment until Nora was 17 and finally gave it to Goodwill. Her mother, Marion at about 40, photographed from a distance by someone Marion had not known was watching. He had hired someone to watch over Marion's life. He had kept this. At the bottom of the box, beneath the photographs, a baby shoe. White canvas, worn soft, the kind that lasted 3 months of a child's first year and then sat in a box for the rest of a parent's life. Marion's, presumably, from the year before Edward had begun choosing things over people, from the time before the choosing became permanent. Beneath the shoe, a folded note. One small square of paper, creased and old, the handwriting Edward's but looser than the journals, the writing of someone who had sat down in a particular kind of feeling and written quickly before it passed. Dated 1984. The year Marion would have been 23. 5 years after she had left Pennsylvania and not come back. 4 words and 1 sentence. I kept the wrong things. I should have kept you instead. Nora sat on the sealed stone floor of the vault room her grandfather had built to hold the most important things in his life, and she held the box that held the most important thing he had kept, which was not a stone and not gold. He had known in 1984. He had been 48 years old, and he had already understood completely that he had made the fundamental wrong choice, and he had written it down and put it in a box and locked it in the vault next to the collection he had chosen instead, and he had lived with that knowledge for the next 40 years without finding a way to say it to the person it was addressed to. Marion had died at 53 without knowing this box existed, without knowing that her father had looked for her in photographs taken at a distance, had kept her baby's shoe, had written her a note in 1984 that he had never sent. She had spent her adult life in Queens with the knowledge that her father was a cold man who valued things more than people, and she had been right about that. And she had never known that he had also sat down one day and written 4 words and a sentence that said he knew. It was not enough. It would not have been enough even if Marion had known. But it was what there was, the full extent of what Edward Calloway had been able to do with the thing he felt toward the daughter he had driven away. Nora closed the box carefully and carried it upstairs. She set it on the library desk, in the square of evening light from the window positioned to catch the day's last hour, and she sat with it for a while without opening it again. The foundation would be in Marian's name. She had already decided that, but now she understood it differently. Not just as a tribute, as a continuation of something Marian had already been doing without any of this behind her, the particular kind of practical care for other people that Marian had practiced her whole adult life, without resources, without acknowledgement, without any inheritance except what she had built in herself. The foundation would give it scale. It would not change what Marian had been. The library was quiet. Outside the window, the December dark had come fully down over the grounds, and the old hardwoods were silhouettes against a sky that had a few visible stars in it, the kind of sky that required distance from city light to see properly. Lily appeared in the doorway. "Dinner?" she said. "In a few minutes." Nora looked at her daughter in the doorframe. In the library of a manor house in rural Pennsylvania that had been all of those things in sequence. A secret, a vault, an inheritance, and now, incrementally, a home. "Come here for a second." Lily came and leaned against the desk beside her, close in the way she was when she wanted presents rather than anything in particular. She looked at the wooden box. "What's in it?" "Some things your great-grandmother's father kept. Photographs of her." Lily looked at the box for a moment. "The woman from the letter he wrote you?" "Yes. He loved her, but he couldn't say it." Nora looked at her daughter. "How did you know that?" "Because he kept her things, but he didn't talk to her." Lily shrugged slightly, the shrug of someone for whom this was obvious. "People do that. They keep things instead of saying things. Tyler at school does it. He kept Cass's pencil for a whole week before she figured out he just wanted to be her friend." Nora looked at the box on the desk in the evening light. A baby shoe and 4 photographs and a note written in 1984 that said what should have been said in 1979 and in 1975 and in 1963 and probably in every year before that. Kept in a vault alongside $390 million worth of colored stones and gold because Edward Calloway had not known any other way to hold something he valued. He had kept the wrong things. He had written. He should have kept her instead. He had kept her anyway, in the only way available to someone who was what he was. They ate dinner in the kitchen, pasta from a box, the kind Lily had been asking for since they arrived because it was the kind she was used to. Nora made the sauce from scratch from what was in the pantry, not because she had to but because it was something to do with her hands, and they ate at the kitchen table with the window showing them the dark grounds and the outline of the old trees. Lily talked about school, about a project her class was doing on local geography, about the fact that Pennsylvania had the most covered bridges of any state, about the creek that ran through a property 2 miles east of the manor that she had been asking about exploring since the second week. Nora said they could go on Saturday, if the weather held. Lily said the weather would hold. She said this with the complete certainty of someone who had no basis for the claim and did not feel this was a problem. After dinner, after Lily had gone to brush her teeth, Nora walked through the ground floor of the manor the way she had begun doing in the evenings, not inspecting, just moving through the rooms to understand them. The sitting room where the fireplace drew well, and where Eddie had replaced 3 sections of the hearth surround that had crumbled. The dining room with its 14 chairs that she had started using as a workspace for the larger design projects, spreading things across the length of the table. The study that Edward had deliberately cleared, which she had not yet decided what to do with. She ended in the entrance hall. The mirror was where it had always been, taking up the far wall, the carved frame and the aged glass, and the particular amber warmth of December lamplight moving in the imperfections of the backing. She had stood in front of this mirror more times in the past 88 days than she could count, usually without intending to, pulled back to it by the same gravitational quality it had had on the afternoon they arrived. Lily came downstairs in her pajamas and stood beside her. They looked at the mirror, and the mirror looked back at them. 2 reflections in glass that had been reflecting things in this hallway since 1962 at least, since Edward had installed it after he understood what the manor was for. "Are we going to keep it here?" Lily asked. "The mirror?" "Yes." Lily considered this. "Because it's beautiful?" It was beautiful. She had understood that from the first afternoon. The carving was the work of someone who had known what they were doing with extraordinary skill, the iterating pattern building on itself in ways that never resolved to simple repetition, the depth of the channels cut with precision that had not softened in 60 years. The glass itself had a quality that modern mirrors did not, something warm and imperfect and honest about what mirrors actually were, which was surfaces that showed you something close to yourself rather than exactly yourself. But that was not the only reason. Because it's the reason we're here, Nora said. Lily nodded the way she nodded when something confirmed what she had already decided. They stood together in the entrance hall of the house for a while longer, in the lamplight and the December quiet, the house settling gently around them with the small sounds of old stone releasing heat. Nora thought about the drive up from Queens on that November Tuesday, Lily asleep in the back seat through New Jersey and most of Pennsylvania, the storage unit with its $89 monthly fee and its boxes of things she had not known whether she would need again. The eviction notice stuck to her foot, the $1,847 in her checking account that was moving in one direction only. The decision made at a kitchen table late at night, that was not really a decision so much as the recognition that the alternative was worse. She thought about standing in this entrance hall for the first time, cold air moving out of the house and the smell of sealed time, and seeing the mirror at the far end and walking toward it before she had decided to. She thought about Lily tapping the glass on a November morning and turning around with the matter-of-fact certainty of an 8-year-old who had noticed something and did not need permission to say so. Mom, the mirror isn't a mirror. The work ahead was real and would take time. The collection sale would require 18 months of careful coordination with people who understood how these markets functioned. The manor's restoration would take 2 years of thoughtful work by people who knew how to treat stone buildings of this age. The foundation in Marion's name would take longer than either, building slowly towards something that had the same quality as what Marion had been, which was practical and lasting and not interested in being noticed. Those were problems with solutions. She had become a different kind of person about problems with solutions somewhere in the past 88 days, somewhere between the morning the eviction notice stuck to her foot and this evening, standing in a hallway that was hers. She thought about Edward's letter one final time. It has no meaning except what you choose to give it. She had chosen. Lily reached up and tapped the mirror once with her knuckles, lightly, the way she always did, the way she had done on the morning everything started. The deep resonance came back. The sound of the larger space behind the glass, the corridor and the steel door and the vault room beyond, 40 feet of organized beauty beneath the east wing built into bedrock. The sound was familiar now. It was the sound of home. I know, Lily said to the mirror. The way she said things to the deer in the grounds and the hawk in the east wing eaves, addressing things that could not answer in terms she could recognize. She turned away and went upstairs to bed. Nora stayed in the entrance hall a moment longer. She put her hand flat against the glass, the way she had done on the evening the lab results came in, the way she had done many times since arriving, until the gesture had become something like habit, something like the way you touched a door frame when you went through it, not thinking, just marking the passage. Cold. Old glass was always cold. But behind it, everything Edward had built. The acquisition ledgers going back to January 1962. The labeled cases and the organized drawers and the rough yellow diamond that a laboratory in Philadelphia had confirmed was something that had no real comparable in recent private sale history. The wooden box with M.C. carved on the lid. The note that said, "I kept the wrong things," written 40 years after the wrong things had been chosen and never sent to the person it was addressed to. Her mother had grown up in this county and left at 19, and spent her whole life building something from the ground up with no help from the man who should have given it. She had been right to leave. She had been right about everything. She had died without knowing any of this existed, and that was the one thing in the whole story that could not be fixed or compensated or made right, the one part that would stay unfixed. But the foundation would have her name on it. The scholarship that would go to first-generation students in this region, students who were making calculations at kitchen tables about what they could and could not afford, students who were figuring out how to build things from almost nothing, would carry Marion's name. Not Edward's. Not the Calloway name at all. Marion Webb. The woman who had left Pennsylvania at 19 with nothing but what she knew how to do and had built everything else from there. That was enough. That was what there was. Nora turned off the entrance hall light, and went to check on Lily. Her daughter was already asleep, the window seat quilt pulled up, the room in the particular quiet of a child genuinely at rest. The window showed the December sky and the bare branches of the old trees moving slightly in a wind that had come up since dinner. The room was warm. Nora stood in the doorway for a moment. 8 years old, and already the kind of person who listened to mirrors and noticed hollow sounds, and said plainly what she observed without waiting for permission. A child who would grow up in this house, or in the world this house had made possible, knowing that the thing about locked places was not that they were locked, but that there was always a way to hear what was inside. If you were patient, and you paid attention, and you did not decide in advance what you were going to find. Marian would have loved her. Edward would have loved her too, in the only way he knew how, which was not enough, and which was also something. He had kept the wrong things. He had also, in the end, pointed toward the right one. Nora went downstairs and made herself a cup of tea in the kitchen with the thick walls, in the house that was hers, in the life that was beginning. Outside, the old trees moved in the wind, and the December stars were visible through the kitchen window. And somewhere in the east wing the red-tailed hawk that had been nesting in the eaves since October made a brief sound, and went quiet, and the manor settled gently into the night the way old stone houses settled, sure of what they were made of, comfortable with how long they had been standing, at ease with all the time still ahead. The storage unit in Queens cost $89 a month, and Nora had been paying it since November without going back. She went in January, driving south on a Tuesday with Lily in the passenger seat and a rented trailer hitched to the back of the car she had bought in December, a reliable second-hand SUV that could manage Pennsylvania winters and that Lily had named Douglas for reasons she could not explain. The drive was 4 hours in light traffic, and both of them were quiet for most of it. Lily reading, Nora watching the landscape change from open rural countryside to the particular compression of the approaches to New York, where everything became more and more dense until you were in it entirely. The storage facility was on a street in Woodside that Nora had driven past 100 times in the years she had lived in Queens. She had not thought of it as a specific place in any of those years, just part of the inventory of the neighborhood, present without being noticed. She noticed it now. The unit was a 10 by 10 space on the ground floor, number 47, and when she rolled up the door the smell of their old apartment came out in a slow wave. Familiar in the way that something became familiar without your realizing it had. The particular combination of the wood furniture and the cardboard boxes and the specific cleaning products Marian had used and that Nora had kept buying without thinking about why. Lily stood in the doorway looking at the stacked contents with the expression she brought to things that required her to recalibrate. All of this was in our apartment. Most of it. It looks like more than I remembered. It did. For months had given the things a different quality, arranged here in the flat light of a storage facility rather than distributed through the rooms they had lived in for 6 years. The couch she had bought secondhand the first year after Marcus left, the kitchen table that had held so many calculations, the boxes of books and kitchen things and Lily's toys, and the random accumulation of a life organized by someone who had not had the luxury of keeping only what she loved. She kept less than she expected. Some of the furniture was right for the manor, the kitchen table particularly, and a bookcase that would work in the library alongside Edward's texts. She kept Lily's things and her own books and 2 boxes of objects that were harder to categorize, things that had been Marian's before they were Nora's, things that carried the specific weight of being the last evidence of a person. In one of those boxes, near the bottom, she found a stack of index cards bound with a rubber band that had gone brittle and snapped when she touched it. Marian's handwriting on every card. Recipes, she understood from the first one, but not in any conventional format. Marian had written them the way she wrote everything, efficiently, with abbreviations and shorthand that made sense only if you knew her. Garlic S/M meant a small to medium clove, her way of avoiding the size judgment the recipe writers always assumed you shared. P of salt meant a palm of salt, not a pinch. The measurements were human rather than precise, calibrated to Marian's specific hands and Marian's specific tolerances. The handwriting was so familiar it arrived like a sound rather than a visual. The particular slant of Marian's lowercase letters, the way she always printed her capitals even in the middle of cursive sentences, the ink she used, which had been a specific shade of blue that Nora had not thought about in years. She sat on the floor of the storage unit with the index cards in her hands for a while. Lily sat down beside her without asking what was wrong, because nothing was wrong in the ordinary sense, and she understood this. She looked at the top card, which was a recipe for the shortbread Marion had made at Christmas, the shortbread that had been the one consistent seasonal thing in a childhood otherwise not organized around traditions. Her handwriting is like yours, Lily said. Nora looked at the card, and then at her own hands. She had not thought about this before. It is, she said. They took less than 2 hours to sort through everything and load what they were keeping. The rest went to a donation center 3 blocks away, a transaction that took 12 minutes, and that Nora had anticipated feeling more complicated than it did. She felt mostly ready. The things she was keeping were the ones she wanted. The ones she was leaving were not losses, just objects that had belonged to a chapter that was complete. On the drive back to Pennsylvania, Lily fell asleep somewhere in New Jersey. Nora drove through the flat industrial corridor north of the city with Lily's head tipped against the window and Marion's recipe cards in the box behind her, and she thought about what it meant to carry something forward versus what it meant to put it down. She had carried the debt and the eviction notice and the arithmetic that never came out right, and she had put those down. She was carrying Marion's handwriting, the specific slope of it, the palm of salt abbreviations, the shortbread recipe, and she would carry that for the rest of her life and give it to Lily when the time was right. Some things you put down when you were finished with them. Some things you kept because they were what you were made of. The Marion Webb Foundation filed as a registered charitable organization on the 14th of March. Raymond Sills' colleague, a woman named Carol Park who specialized in nonprofit structures and who communicated with the brisk warmth of someone who genuinely enjoyed her work, had spent 6 weeks helping Nora get the paperwork right. The structure was straightforward, and Carol insisted it stay that way. Scholarship funding for first-generation college students in a 5-county region of rural Pennsylvania. Annual awards renewable for up to 4 years. Selection based on academic merit and financial need in equal measure. Nora had wanted one additional criterion, stated plainly in the application materials, which was evidence of having built something despite limited resources. Not an essay prompt. A factual question. Tell us something you made, or fixed, or figured out on your own. The first round of applications opened the same week the foundation filed. Nora had not expected to read the applications herself. Carol had recommended a review committee, 3 or 4 local educators who could assess academic records and provide context she lacked about the region's schools. That was the right structure, and Nora agreed with it. She also read the applications herself, alone in the library in the evenings after Lily was in bed, because she wanted to understand who was out there. There were 43 applications in the first round for 3 scholarships. She read all 43. Most of them were good. Several were more than good. The students wrote about themselves with the particular combination of directness and restraint she recognized from her own experience of needing things and not wanting to perform the needing. One boy from a farm family in Tioga County was applying for an agricultural engineering program. His answer to the building question described how he had rewired the milking parlor at age 15 when the electrician's estimate came back at more money than his family had. He had checked his work 3 times and then done it again. The parlor had been running fine for 4 years. One application came from Hale's Crossing itself. Her name was Delia Marsh, 22 years old, daughter of a farm family, applying for a nursing program at a school in Allentown. She was a year behind most applicants her age because she had taken a year after high school to work while her father recovered from a cardiac event, supporting the family's income while her mother managed the farm. The application was factual about this without dwelling on it, in the tone of someone reporting conditions rather than seeking sympathy. Her answer to the building question was short. My grandmother told me when I was young that education was the one thing no one could take from you once you had it. I have been building toward that one thing since I was 14. I would like to finish building it now. Nora read that answer twice and then set it down on the desk and looked at the library shelves for a while. She did not make the selection herself. The committee did that, with complete independence and without knowing what she had or had not read. 3 weeks later, Carol sent her the names of the 3 recipients. Delia Marsh was among them. The Christie's auction was scheduled for a Thursday in May. The Yellow Diamond, which Daniel Park had cataloged as Lot 1 in the first auction package from the Calloway collection, had been cut by a specialist in Antwerp over the preceding 3 months. The primary gem that emerged from the 247-carat rough was 94 carats, fancy intense yellow, vs1 clarity. A cushion cut that Daniel Parks said, when he called to tell her, had been done with a restraint and patience he had rarely seen. The cutter had left weight on the stone that a less disciplined person would have sacrificed for symmetry. The result was something that had not existed as a finished object until that spring. Nora watched the auction from the library at the manor on a laptop propped against a stack of mineralogy texts. Lily sat beside her, ostensibly reading but mostly watching Nora's face. The room in the Christie's London sale room was visible through the streaming feed, rows of bidders and phones pressed to ears, the auctioneer in a dark suit behind his podium with the composed authority of someone managing a room that had learned to be very quiet while enormous numbers moved. The lot before the diamond went quickly. Then the diamond appeared on the screen, and the auctioneer described it in the measured language of catalog copy that contained excitement beneath its professionalism, and the bidding opened. It began in phone bids. 3 paddles in the room, 2 phone lines, 1 online bidder. Within 4 minutes the room paddles had dropped out, and it was down to the phone lines and the screen. She had been told to expect a result somewhere between $80 and $95 million. Daniel Park had been careful about the range, reminding her that auction outcomes for stones of this rarity were not fully predictable because fully predictable required precedent, and this stone had none. The bidding passed $80 million in the 8th minute. It passed $85 million in the 10th. At $88, $5 million, the second phone line went quiet. The auctioneer's voice dropped by approximately 1 register, the particular controlled shift that auctioneers use to signal that the remaining bidder was buying, and the room needed to understand this was the end. He asked once, twice, the third time with the slight pause that preceded the hammer. The hammer came down. $88. $5 million. The room in London was visible applauding through the screen, and then the feed cut to the next lot, and the screen was showing something else entirely. Lily looked at her mother. Nora sat in the library chair with the laptop open and the evening light from the windows moving across the desk, and the mineralogy texts and the index card propped against the monitor that had Marian's shortbread recipe written on it in blue ink, because she had put it there 2 months ago and not moved it. $88.5 million for a stone that had been inside a rough the size of a walnut at the back of a drawer in a vault beneath the east wing. She had been waiting to feel something specific when this happened. She was not sure what she had expected. Euphoria was the obvious candidate, and it was not that. It was something quieter. Something in the same register as the feeling she'd had when she paid off the hospital bill on the porch steps, which was not triumph but completion, the particular quality of a number disappearing from a calculation you had been running for a long time. $88.5 million was going into accounts that now existed in her name, where it would sit alongside the proceeds of the 3 lots from the previous week's sale and the 12 lots Daniel Park had scheduled for the autumn. And from those accounts, the restoration work on the manor would be funded, and the foundation would be funded, and Lily's future would be funded, and none of the arithmetic that had been running in Nora's peripheral vision for the past several years would ever need to be run the same way again. Is that good? Lily said. It's very good. Are you happy? Nora thought about this for a moment. I think I will be, she said. Right now I think I'm still processing. Lily nodded as if this were a normal thing to say. Cass said I can name one of the new lambs. She said I've been helpful enough this spring to earn it. What are you going to name it? I'm deciding between Marian and Douglas. Lily considered. I might name it Marian Douglas. Nora looked at her daughter. That's a good name, she said. The restoration of the East Wing began in June. Eddie had brought in a structural engineer he trusted, a woman named June who specialized in historic stone buildings, and who walked through the East Wing on her first visit with the focused pleasure of someone encountering a problem she was exactly qualified to solve. The East Wing had been structurally sound, but had suffered from the 12 years of inadequate drainage that had allowed moisture to work at the interior walls. The ivy on the exterior had been removed in the spring, carefully, section by section, to allow the stone to breathe and to expose the masonry to proper inspection. Inside the east wall, when the restoration crew opened a section to address the moisture damage, they found the original construction markings on a timber lintel that had been sealed inside the wall in 1911. A date, penciled in the cramped handwriting of someone working quickly. April 12, 1911. And below it, Initials, RM. The stonemason who had built this wall had marked his work before sealing it inside. The way craftsmen marked things they expected to last, not for recognition, but for the private satisfaction of knowing the mark was there. Nora ran her hand over the penciled date. R.M. had been dead for a century. His work had been inside this wall for that entire time, built so well that what opened it now was not failure but the decision to see what was inside. Some things lasted. The Autumn Scholarship Dinner for the Marion Webb Foundation was held in a community room at the Hales Crossing Public Library on a Friday evening in October. Carol had organized it, which meant it ran on time and the food was good and the room looked better than a community room usually did, with simple arrangements of wildflowers in mason jars along the tables that Patsy Burke had contributed from the diner's contacts with a local farm. The 3 scholarship recipients sat at the front table with their families. The room held about 40 people, local educators and a few county officials and several people from the community who had known Marion was not a real person, but had given money to the foundation anyway, because Patsy had a way of asking people to do things that made declining feel like the harder option. Nora spoke briefly. She had written and rewritten the remarks several times and then set all the versions aside and spoke without notes, which turned out to be easier than she had anticipated. She said that Marion Webb had grown up in this county and left at 19 with nothing but what she knew how to do, that she had raised a daughter in Queens for 25 years on a single income and had never once suggested that the arithmetic was impossible, even when it was, that she had passed down pearl earrings and recipe cards and the specific understanding that you did not give up on things before you had figured out exactly what they were. She said Marion had never known about the inheritance, and this was the hardest part to say out loud. And she said it plainly. Marion had lived and died without knowing that the man who had failed her had been watching over her from a distance for 40 years and had left everything to her daughter in the only apology he knew how to make. She had not needed any of it to build the life she built. She had built it on her own, from the raw material of her own capability, which was considerable. The foundation was named for her because what Marion had been, the particular quality of her attention and her patience, and her willingness to build things that took time to become what they were meant to be, was exactly the quality this scholarship was meant to recognize and support. She thanked the 3 recipients and sat down. After the dinner, people gathered in the smaller clusters that formed at the end of events when the formal part was over and people were finding their way back to ordinary conversation. Nora was talking to June, who had brought photographs of the East Wing restoration progress, when a young woman appeared at her shoulder and waited with the particular patience of someone who was not going to interrupt but was not going to leave either. Delia Marsh was taller than Nora had imagined from the application, which was a reminder that applications were not people, only outlines of people. She had the settled, physical confidence of someone who had been working outdoors since childhood, and she had her grandmother's eyes, or so Nora assumed, because the photograph on the application had been a school portrait taken at 17, and this was a person 5 years past that. She said she had not known whose name was on the scholarship until tonight. Nora said she was glad Delia had come. Delia said, "Will you tell me about her? Your mother." Not the speech part. Something specific. Nora thought about this. People who asked for something specific rather than something general were the ones worth talking to. She told Delia about the recipe cards, the palm of salt measurement, the way Marion had written recipes as personal notation rather than instruction, assuming a familiarity with her own hands and her own kitchen that made the cards useless to anyone else, but completely precise to her. She told Delia that she had found the cards in a storage unit in January, bound with a rubber band that broke when she touched it, and that Marion's handwriting had arrived in that moment with the specific force of something familiar encountered unexpectedly, which was different from the force of something familiar encountered in the place where you expected to find it. Delia listened without interrupting. "She sounds like my grandmother," Delia said. She kept everything in her head, said that was the only filing system that moved when she moved. A pause. "She died last year. She would have liked tonight." They stood together for a while in the way of people who have just told each other something true and are comfortable with what comes after. Outside the library windows, the October dark had fully settled over Hale's Crossing, the one stoplight on Main Street blinking its yellow rhythm, the grain elevator visible against the sky, the shapes of the old hills beyond the town that had been here long before anything else, and would be here long after. Lily was at a table across the room, drawing something on a napkin, a detailed and apparently ambitious illustration she had been working on for the past 20 minutes, occasionally holding it up to the light and then going back to add something. Nora watched her daughter. The work ahead was still real. 12 more auction lots spread across the following year, the East Wing restoration through to spring, the second round of foundation applications opening in January, the West Wing rooms that had not yet been properly addressed, the formal gardens whose bones were still visible beneath 12 years of growth, and which a landscape specialist had told her could be substantially restored given time and specific attention. She was good at time and specific attention. She had come here in November with a car full of what mattered and a number in her bank account that moved in one direction, and she had walked into a house that had been waiting for someone to listen carefully to what it held, and she had listened, and the house had told her everything. Not because she had known what she was looking for, because she had not decided in advance what she was going to find. Delia said she needed to get back to her family, and shook Nora's hand with the firm grip of someone raised to mean a handshake, and thanked her again. Not for the money, specifically, for saying her grandmother's name out loud in a room full of people. Nora said she was glad she had. After everyone had gone and the room was being cleared and Lily had fallen asleep in a chair with her napkin illustration pressed to her chest, Nora stood at the library window and looked out at the dark main street of Hale's Crossing. Marion had grown up 20 miles from here, had walked out of this county at 19 and not come back, had spent 30 years in Queens building a life that never once referenced what she had left or what she had lost, or what had been kept in a vault a 4-hour drive away by a man who had never found the right words. The foundation had her name on it now. In this county, in the place she had left. That was not a correction. It was not a righting of a wrong. The wrong stayed wrong, the way certain things stayed permanently. But this was something. A name spoken in a room. A scholarship given in that name. To people with the same kind of capable quietness Marion had carried, the same willingness to build things that took time. It was not enough. It was what there was. And what there was, Nora had learned this year more completely than she had ever known it, was more than sufficient when you paid attention to it. She woke Lily gently, and they drove home to the manor through October dark and the particular smell of Pennsylvania farmland in autumn, the turned earth and the cold coming in, and the manor was lit from inside when they came up the lane, the East Wing's new windows throwing warm light out across the grounds, and it looked like what it was, which was a house being brought back to what it had always been capable of. Lily carried her napkin illustration inside and pinned it to the library corkboard she had claimed months ago for her own work. Nora looked at it before she turned off the library light. A drawing of the entrance hall, rendered in the specific detail of a child who had been looking carefully at something for a long time. The staircase with its iron balusters. The drop-clothed furniture now uncovered. The transom above the front door. And at the far end of the hall, filling the wall from floor to ceiling, the mirror. Lily had drawn it the way she saw everything. Directly, without embellishment, with the particular accuracy of someone who paid attention. The carved frame exactly as it was. The aged glass with its slight imperfections. 2 figures reflected in it, small against the mirror's height, a woman and a child. She had titled it at the bottom in careful letters. Home. Stories like this remind us that starting over is terrifying, but it is always possible. If you or someone you love is facing a total reset right now, whether from a divorce, a loss, or a financial disaster, you need a plan. Scan the QR code on your screen or click the link below to get the Phoenix Blueprint for just $17. It gives you the exact steps you need to take in the first 48 hours and a 90-day plan to get your independence back. Thank you for watching.